You now have a really, really spread out workforce and a really, really spread out set of resources to both allow them access to and secure their access to.
Technology is transforming how we think, how we lead, and how we win. From InterVision, this is Status Go, the show helping IT leaders move beyond the status quo, master their craft, and propel their IT vision.
Hello and welcome to InterVision Status Go. I'm your host, Chris Campbell. Today we're speaking with Nicholai Piagentini from Palo Alto Networks. Nick is an engineering lead that focuses on SaaS and cloud security. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here, Chris.
Excellent. So before we really dive into today's topic, which is focused on cloud security for remote users, let's get into your background a bit. I've always known you from your time at Palo and working on the Aperture and the SaaS security model. So you've been in this space for quite a while.
Yeah, I have. I started in education. So probably 20 years ago, I was doing a lot of Microsoft, Novell, Cisco, and security training. And then the first real vendor I worked for was a company called NetScreen Technologies.
Yeah.
Made a really nice IPsec firewall, right, back in the day. And then we were acquired by Juniper. And I worked at Juniper for a while in their security products group, which got renamed like 18 times. And then I left that for Palo Alto probably 13 years ago. There's only 46 people in the company when I started there, and I did education services for them.
Wow. You have definitely put your time in and definitely know the portfolio cold.
I've certainly watched it grow. I think our first class that taught everything there was to know about Palo Alto was 2 days.
Well, it seems like another revolution for Palo Alto is coming from inventing a category that Gartner had to come up with called Next Generation Firewall. It seems to be happening all over again here in 2020 with enterprise services, network security, and cloud security all becoming part of the portfolio. And considering today's new normal and what we're working with lately as far as what happens out there in the world after COVID-19, remote working obviously becoming a large potential increase for business as we know it. It is now the most common topic of conversation in my day-to-day.
Absolutely. We've gone from data center that had all the jewels of the kingdom in one place to so many SaaS applications, AWS being used for development, to the point where there was no longer a clear physical location that represented where people had to access resources. You add that to your users now working from WeWork spaces or on the road or from home. You now have a really, really spread out workforce and a really, really spread out set of resources to both allow them access to and secure their access to.
You know, it's funny, when you think about a VPN, that's exactly what we think of, is giving people secure access to resources. But originally, it really wasn't for security. It was just extending the network to people outside the building, and that was it. It wasn't like that created that much of a perimeter. It was literally, oh, my LAN now extends to this node across a tunnel that hides that traffic from the internet. But today, you know, VPN has become more of a, how do I apply a security policy to somebody that is not inside of a network that has a next generation firewall at the perimeter. So when I look at Prisma Access and the way that, you know, it evolved from Global Protect Cloud Services, it really is a security service that is distributed throughout the world that now gives you the ability to have people accessing things that aren't an extension of your network anymore. Because let's face it, probably 2/3 of your business assets don't live on your network.
Absolutely, right? That we've seen this tremendous change. And you make such a great point that the VPN used to really not be about security. It was just plumbing, right? It's like, how do I get access to this machine that doesn't have a public IP, basically? But now what we've realized is, you know, not only do we need to provide that secure access doesn't go to one location. And even more than access is we need to ensure, kind of in the modern threat landscape, that employees are always covered by a full security stack. Right. I mean, when I started in security, and I know the same was for you, like the image of the attack, the hacker, and the whole process was, finding an exposed bastion host in a DMZ and then, port scanning it to find what services were running and if any of them were vulnerable, and then exploiting that service to gain access. And now the attackers just target the user, right? It's spear phishing, it's malware targeting the endpoint. The weak point in the security chain becomes the employee and their laptop. And if you let them just run VPNs when they need to access a resource and then turn it off when it's not useful to them, you're letting them opt out of security probably when it's the most critical time for them to opt in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's some of the problems even with native like split tunneling. You're sending all traffic not destined to your network to the internet without any policy on it. But if it's exposing data to the internet from that laptop, or that moved from the network to the laptop and then out, you have no visibility. And it creates a giant hole that I think what we're seeing here is a move towards all traffic being policied and inspected regardless of its destination.
And from a security perspective, we have to do that. We have definitely seen, our Unit 42 and our researchers, an uptick in attacks that are, phishing-based attacks against users, because the attackers out there see that, all of a sudden, so many of their potential targets are now outside of the enterprise security perimeter, right? They're working from home and they're not using the full tunnel, always on kind of concept for security. And so now they become more vulnerable, right? They're easier to attack. And, I can't fault all these organizations for maybe not adopting full tunnel always on, because if you're using the traditional VPN comes into the central location, right? And then egresses to the internet for security. That's a really terrible design for full tunnel always on. It users don't like it. Performance is bad. You hit your network connection twice. There's all these reasons not to do that with that kind of traditional design.
Yeah, not to mention all those users outside the building hairpinning through that appliance means maybe you need a bigger appliance, or maybe your ISP now needs to be upsized, even though the people aren't in the building at all. It really does seem backwards, even though it's commonplace how we've done things for 20 years.
Absolutely,
So
right?
now we're cloud-based, and that is how Prisma Access works, right?
Exactly. Now we're cloud-based, and now we can drive all of that through a kind of enforcement point that's nearby where the user is. So backhaul becomes non-existent. The only things that have to return kind of to the place of origin would be the traffic that actually has to go there for resources that are located there. Everything else can hit this, security stack in the cloud and then just egress to the internet from there. So it's that idea that if our users are spread out and our resources are spread out, our security stack has to be spread out as well, right? You have to adopt your controls to the environment you're trying to secure.
So you have a Palo Alto owned, leased, whatever you would say, rented space that is a secure mesh, if you will, of these nodes that are then globally distributed throughout a hyperscale cloud or colos or something to that extent to house all of these virtual instances.
Exactly. We leverage AWS and Google Compute currently. So we're multi-cloud, which is kind of critical in this day and age, because we find that some of these hypercloud providers, right, have better presence in different locations. So, like Middle East, I think Azure really covers better than, say, Google, if I remember correctly. And so by leveraging that, we can spin up resources incredibly quickly. And then they just, using nothing groundbreaking. They have, BGP based IPsec tunnels between these various nodes to drop a secure infrastructure over this public internet. But the kind of beauty of it as a service is that the user doesn't have to manage all those tunnels and all that routing. It appears right to the customer as a nice Class C segment, an Ethernet segment in the sky, right? That connects all these points. And one of the great things is, as we've watched companies have to shift to supporting a massive mobile workforce that they had never intended to support 2 months ago, and they'll ask, like, how fast can I turn on, right, VPN connectivity for 1,000 users? Once the planning is done, the actual pulling the trigger and letting it happen can be done in like 40 minutes. Which is ridiculous, right?
And Palo Alto takes on that scaling for demand, right? I mean, they buy a service from Palo Alto based upon users, and wherever those users happen to spin up, then you just scale that particular region or those particular nodes?
Right. The pricing is based on the number of users or the bandwidth you want to send, and then we're on the hook for maintaining performance for that number of users in that location. And we actually have an SLA around the kind of the latency introduced by the security stack. So we have to scale to support the users. Otherwise, right, we end up owing service credits. And I like that because it creates some interesting scenarios that customers can leverage. And one of them that I think is interesting to talk about is, TLS decrypt. And we're seeing, like when I started with Palo Alto, about maybe 30% of the traffic we saw was SSL. And now it's certainly 80. I'm sure you've seen the same thing. How do you decrypt all that with your on-prem device? And how did you plan for that decryption load 3 years ago when you bought it, right?
Yeah, tough. That's
Yeah.
one of our pushes right now. It's like you bought a next generation firewall, and that's great. And we've deployed it to best practices, but you're still not doing decryption. Why? Oh, well, managing the certificates and, the load on the devices, even though we right-sized it because when we bought them, it was 50% of traffic, and then it was 70. Now it's 80. And it's like, people find themselves afraid to start doing decryption on the firewall. Yet, if 80% of the traffic is encrypted, how effective is your purchase?
Right? How can you leverage so many of those kind of next generation capabilities when the application is just SSL? Right? You have very
exactly. It kind of obscures the point of why you bought it and why you pay for all these threat feeds and services to not implement it properly. And I am attending a training session tomorrow with the Pacific Northwest team on best practices around SSL decrypt. It is the hot topic right now.
Yeah.
So Prisma totally makes sense that you don't have to scale a firewall and say, oh, I need this particular model with, this much overhead over what we're doing today to accommodate for it. If it just scales on demand, you turn on that feature and it increases what you need, but that happens with auto scaling behind the scenes.
Right, at the same price point, right? You pay for a user or you pay for, 10 megs going to it. That could be plain text or all TLS 1.2, right? It doesn't matter. And so it makes it a really attractive place to start doing that, right? Because the commercial limitation is, and then the technical limitation has been removed. And I remember when we saw, malware starting to be delivered from SSL encrypted websites, and the attackers used to be too lazy to get certificates. It would just be normally delivered over plain text. But now even they're doing it, right? So it's across the board, and it's such a critical.
Are you sure you want to proceed to this website? Yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
So we talked a lot about the user to all the distributed nodes. What happens on the north side of these firewall nodes that are out there in the world? So intelligent routing of traffic, I'm assuming, based upon where the resource is or what they're trying to access, is the theory?
Yes, absolutely. And what we found as we deployed it, and you know how this is, sometimes you'll encounter some design somewhere that you hadn't expected, and you have to adjust to it. And so what we realized is there's some kind of broad categories that, customers will fall into. There's ones that have already invested in a lot of interconnectivity, maybe lease lines, MPLS between their sites, and they want to, continue to leverage that investment. And there's others that are more than happy to let us kind of using Google Fiber be the backbone. And so we actually had to implement, it was a new routing term I got to learn, and it comes from the cloud. It's a hot potato routing. In hot potato routing, you don't egress the traffic from the best path in the cloud. You get it out of the cloud as soon as you can. So basically you drop into the customer's network at the first opportunity, and you let the customer traverse it to whatever its final location is going to be, as opposed to staying in your kind of BGP environment to the, best connection there. And
sounds like a greedy service provider trick.
Yeah, totally right. But we find that some customers have invested enough that they basically want the access infrastructure to drop that traffic back to them in whatever location is closest to where it came in. And then they want to, get it to, their Hong Kong office or their London office through their own WAN infrastructure. And that was a new thing. I'd never encountered that particular term before. So I thought that was interesting to learn something new in that space.
And everything else, SaaS-based stuff like Salesforce, Dropbox, etc., just routes directly to them. If you have AWS VPCs where a lot of your data center services are hosted, it'll just terminate off a direct connect that Palo Alto, I'm assuming, has, or because the infrastructure is already in it, maybe it already is in that Amazon backbone?
Yeah, we have two real kind of approaches for the AWS. Either we just egress to them from kind of a known set of IPs, or
Mhm.
we've started seeing a lot of people building an IPsec tunnel directly from access into their like transit gateways.
Yeah,
So basically, they've taken their AWS environment and they've taken the internal space there and made it available for their users to access. And since we really push for the always on full tunnel kind of design, that allows what used to be the process is a developer would fire up their open VPN and connect into AWS and then do work and then turn it off and they're done. So now they just
right.
access it without having to like have this transitional moment where they say I am now accessing my development environment. But we've actually got pushback on that. There's a number of customers that feel that they want the developer to have to actively opt in to access with their development environment. And for that, we just use our authentication policy. So perhaps we trigger a step up authentication when the developer
Right.
wants to access the dev environment in AWS.
Right. So all of the end user who has an agent basically on their phone, tablet, laptop, workstation, whatever it might be, is ultimately proxied to the local instantiation of that policy enforcement or that virtual firewall node.
Mm-hmm.
Any complaints there about being in a full proxy model, or is it, internet traffic just goes to the internet anyway, even if the tunnel's still being instantiated, or
Yeah, the most pushback we get is around video and voice traffic. There is a palpable, permanent level of fear around tunneling your video and voice. And obviously, we know where this comes from because if you were backhauling that any distance, it super degraded the quality. And so there is still that idea that why should I send video or voice traffic down a tunnel? There's really not much security value in it, and all it can do is degrade the flow. And so I can understand that. We have some kind of interesting features within our VPN for a kind of just-in-time split tunneling, where
Mhm.
the session is built, through the tunnel, and then when the firewall through App ID identifies the traffic, we can tell the client to basically stop that session, reestablish it, but outside of the tunnel. So instead of whitelisting an IP or URL, we whitelist it by layer 7 identification, and then it becomes like a just-in-time pinhole split tunnel for those applications. So we still get the log, but we don't have the traffic continue through the firewall.
Yeah, it's clever.
Yeah, we had to do it.
Yeah, that's the beauty of your native architecture being built around identifying applications from packets.
Yeah, it makes it really easy to do a more kind of intelligent decision around that rather than just to a URL or IP addresses. Though I have to say, I've encountered so much security now that's based around whitelisting IPs, and I had not realized just how many core
Yeah.
functions and inter-vendor communication is really gated purely by static IP whitelists.
Yeah, it almost seems like the dark ages nowadays, but it's so hard to get away from that. Blacklist these countries we don't do business with that have malicious actors, and whitelist these IPs that we consider trust. Even though they could be spoofed, bought and sold, um, it does. It's hard to break old habits, I guess, especially with network guys.
Certainly. And when the infrastructure is already in place to do that, it's hard to get around it. There are so many scenarios where I see a customer works with another vendor, right, that provides a SaaS service to them. And the way that SaaS service connection is secured is the customer gives the service provider the IP addresses they're going to come from.
Yeah.
And then we'll try to introduce something more dynamic where there could be quite a few IP addresses they're coming from because they might, put 106 points of presence globally for these users to egress from. And the immediate feedback is that, oh, the vendor doesn't want that many IPs. Like, I don't have an easy way to update that list. And I'm struck by how limiting that is as a solution, right? So you're trying to move to a more dynamic environment, and then your vendor who you pay, for the service is telling you that they can't support this new security design of yours. And that seems, unfortunate to me.
Well, I'm sure they'll start to see the writing on the wall here in the next few months to few years, and hopefully get in line with how things are coming, get a little more dynamic, whether that's by URL or suffix or something like that, to start to do trusted end to end.
Right. Like I'm curious how that could get implemented. Maybe it'll have something to do with like certificates. We could maybe get more
Yeah,
identity into there.
people love PKI. They can't wait to roll it out. So that,
Right. Like I just said a bad word, right? Everyone listening get that cringe, right?
how dare you?
It is
That
funny
would be have to decrypt traffic too if we knew how to use PKI.
though. We definitely encounter too much of that, right?
Yeah. So all of this kind of makes me think, towards the future. And the funny thing is I look at 5G cellular technology and the speeds and the throughput, and the latency to statistics around what that is capable of. I start to wonder if my age old statement of, oh, everything's going to the cloud, but don't worry, network engineers, they'll always be the campus was right. Um, with software distributed firewall policies that are tunneling off of an agent on a local node to 5G, where you've got cellular signals that are faster, stronger than maybe you had in the office, do we see a network appliance firewall and ISPs delivering circuits to college campuses and to enterprise buildings in the future?
That is a great question, right? If every laptop has fast Wi-Fi through AT&T or T-Mobile, then why would they ever connect to a wireless network, right? Suddenly the network is everywhere, and you're right. We used to at least be able to say, "Hey, I know they're going to have to connect in to Wi-Fi at some point, and then I can like control them there." And that may not that may no longer be the case, assuming they implement it well and it gets out there. I think you're right. It becomes this software as a service for security. I think becomes the only way to control these kind of broadly roaming resources, right? These laptops that are always connected at all times, but never through the corporate network. Um, yeah, maybe that stuff all goes away and everything becomes back to like an agent and a service, which would be kind of a crazy evolution of what we've seen over time.
One agent to rule them all.
Yeah, it's going to become a race for the desktop then, right?
Well, it certainly makes policies a little bit easier to write. I mean, you have a global policy, some regional policies, some divisional policies, and then everything else just comes down to the user's need for access by application.
Yeah, it
And
would really clean up. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it. Quite complex policies that have been around for so long. They've developed just like a layer of crust, old, old rules that can't be removed because no one knows what they, might break. This could be a kind of a fresh breath of, hey, let's rebuild policy in a cleaner, more, organic way that just solves our
yeah,
problems.
yeah, I think that the biggest offenders will be the existing Palo Alto users that already have everything in Panorama, and they can just then apply that to Prisma Access right in Panorama, so that they can leave all of their trail of legacy rules and unknowns in place versus maybe getting a clean, fresh start.
That is funny that the ones best poised to easily transition to that model will be the ones that carry the most baggage with them.
Exactly.
That's a good one. I think it's going to be interesting. I think we're on the cusp of some significant changes around how we see security and networking. Just with a lot of people aren't going to want to come back to the office. I know I certainly want to get back to the office occasionally, but I think
Yeah, there's certain monotony in the house right now of, my daily routine. I'm busy and I'm at my desk all day long, more so probably, but I certainly miss, driving to appointments and that time in between to kind of mentally prepare and so forth. Whereas now it's all stuffed in. And I want to get back out there. Do I therefore want to go to a conference where there's thousands of people congregating and we're meeting in rooms with hundreds? As much fun as we've had at the Palo Alto SE Summit together, I'm not sure as gatherings in that volume are still going to be that digestible to the public.
I think
And
you're right. I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing because
yeah,
the interpersonal stuff is wonderful, right? The connecting with your peers and colleagues, I think that is invaluable, but we all get tired sitting in a lecture hall watching slides, right? It's very hard to learn.
yeah, it definitely shifts the work focus a little bit more into the hands of the people to be able to balance their lives and schedules. We just need to hope that people can, react and adapt to that methodology versus having to know that you have to be in this conference room and then in this place at that time and so forth, and kind of take it into your own hands to become more productive. And with technologies allowing people to work from anywhere at any time securely, I think that at least technology is going that way, and it's up to humankind to rise to the occasion.
Absolutely. All I can say for sure is that we can keep them secure. I don't know if we can keep everybody sane at home, but certainly secure.
That might be Palo Alto's new tagline moving forward.
This was why they don't let me do marketing.
So, Nick, if you had to give advice to an IT leader working to take advantage of some of the opportunities with these challenges, would you tell them to start focusing on something in particular? What would be more important now, adjusting to the new abnormal and utilizing technology to securely empower your workforce?
That's a great question. And I think if I could distill down, and I've been having these conversations intensely for the last month or so, just so many times in a day. And if I could break it down to just like one helpful piece of advice for all of the IT and security teams out there is recognize that whatever emergency thing you put into place here, you will inevitably end up living with for years. So it's not like it's going to be put in and suddenly it's gone later. These decisions you make now, while you need to make them quickly and you need to adapt quickly, you want to make sure it's something that you can grow with and that will address your other issues going forward. Because no matter how much you might think it's just a one-off, you just got to get it done, we all know what happens when something enters production, enters, your environment. It's going to stay there for a while. So take the time to look at everything that product brings you. And you don't want something that just solves this one problem right now, because you will inevitably bump into those walls in 4 months, 6 months, whatever down the line, when you now have to live with this product and have it do all these other things that weren't, front of mind while you were trying to do the Herculean effort of getting all of your users working remotely.
That is a fantastic word of advice right there. Well, Nick, thanks so much for being on today. It's always great to catch up. It's almost better when we're talking about emerging technology, and I've really enjoyed the conversation today.
Yeah, Chris, thank you so much for inviting me on and spending the time with me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
That's great. Well, to our listeners, if you want to know more, go to intervision.com. The show notes will be provided with links and contact information. And thank you so much for listening.
You've been listening to the Status Go podcast. You can subscribe on iTunes or get more information at intervision.com. If you'd like to contribute to the conversation, find Intervision on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Thank you for listening. Until next time.